Hi, today I want to talk to you about new tools and a couple of things that you might have to do to get them ready for cutting. So getting new lino tools is really exciting, I always love it, but sometimes you need to do a little bit of adaptations, and the two things that I'm going to talk about today is how to adjust the length of a handle to fit your hands comfortably, and the other thing is polishing the blade before you use it. And honing and sharpening I've covered already in my Lino with Laura, the first series. So I'm just going to do a little recap at the end of this film just to remind you how to polish blades before you start using your tools, which will keep them sharper for longer. So to go back to adjusting the handle length, don't always need to do this, but sometimes you do. So I've got a couple of new tools here where you can see they've got quite long handles. And I also wanted to talk to you about the knife that you may find if you buy a box of tools from Japan that needs a special adaptation. So to go back to these ones first, I'll talk about the Japanese knife sets in a moment, but to go back to here, these tools, these long scoops, they've got lovely long handles, and the reason for that is because originally they were intended for woodcut, and the idea is that you can then use them with a mallet, and they're quite safe that way with their long handles. Now, I don't use a mallet when I'm cutting lino, so I prefer my broad scoops to have the handles cut off so that they fit comfortably into my hand when I'm cutting. And it's actually quite simple to do, and we're going to show you two versions, one in Ben's fancy workshop where he's got equipment to do it, and the other improvised in here with the kind of tools that I might have, who I'm not a woodworker. So we'll do a couple of versions of that. So deciding the length to cut to. Now, ideally, you already have some Linocut tools that you are comfortable using. So I've got a range here, and you can see there is a bit of wriggle room in the length of the handles. Some handles are shorter than others. And when you're holding a tool in your hand like this, you do have a little bit of flexibility about how long the tool is. So what I do is find the one that you really like, the one that you always pick up and think, oh, that's comfortable, and use that as a guide with the other tool to make a mark. Now, again, don't allow yourself a little bit of wriggle room here too, because if you cut this tool too short, it's cut and there's nothing you can do about it. So if I were going to cut this one, I would line it up with the tool I like, and then I would just allow myself a little bit longer, maybe ½ centimetre or so longer, so that I could always adapt it, cut it down a bit more, sand it off, whatever, to make it perfectly comfortable. So that's fantastic if you've got your tool that you're comfortable with already to measure against. But if you haven't, then what I'd suggest you do is to hold the tool as though it were in your hand already, and turn your hand over, and then you can make a rough guideline. Looking at that, I want it to fit inside my palm, so I'm just going to make it a little bit longer, like so, make my mark, and then I've got a start, and I know I'm going to have to make that shorter, but once I've started cutting it a little bit shorter, then I can adapt it. So those are those two tools marked up, ready to cut. So over here, I've got a box set. Now, I know quite a few people use this sort of box set of tools. They're very reasonably priced, quite a good economy starter box. You might also have a box of power grip tools as well. Now, inside these sets, these are really designed for Japanese woodblock printing, and inside them you'll find a sort of knife on a slant like this. It'll have the same long handle as the other tools, and it's a bit puzzling if you don't know about Japanese woodblock, because you want to put it in your hand and use it like all the other tools, and it simply doesn't work like that. This is called a hangito, and it's designed to cut the outline of Japanese woodblock prints. And the way that it works is you hold it in your fist, and you hold it in your fist exactly as though you were in the shower scene of Psycho and you are the one doing the stabbing. So it's held in the fist like that. And I have the long tip of the blade at my knuckle and the short tip near my wrist. And the idea is that your thumb sits on top of the handle and helps you to control the blade. So it needs to be cut to fit your hand. And the reason it comes with a long handle is that everybody's hand size is different. So the whole idea is that once you've got it, you have to cut it to fit your hand. So I have one here that belongs to me that I've cut to fit my hand. And you can see now that I pop it in my hand is fitting comfortably with my thumb sitting on that blade. Sorry, not on the blade. No, don't put your thumb on the blade, on the handle. And I've cut it with my hand in mind. This is one that I use for teaching, and you can see it's a little bit longer because in a teaching class I have to go for a sort of generic length. So it's still usable, but it's not hand-tailored. Unless you're teaching, you'll be cutting your knife to fit your hand exactly. So again, if this is your first Hangito knife that you're adapting, you won't have one to measure against. So I would hold it in your hand with the blade coming out below your hand like so. And then I would again get a rough idea from putting your thumb against it where your thumb might sit to be comfortable, plus a little bit of wriggle room, and then just make a mark on that to cut it to length. So I've now marked up my tools ready for the cutting. So now I'm going to cut the handle of my Hangito knife to the right length using the kind of tools that I have in the workshop. So not sort of particular woodwork tools. I have found this extremely sad little hacksaw. But the other things I've got are studio type stuff. So the first thing that I've done is to put down my non-slip mat that I would put under the lino to cut, because it's essential that nothing moves while I'm sawing off this handle. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the blade in some masking tape so that it's nice and safe, because I don't want to stab myself while I'm trying to do this piece of woodworking. Woodworking wasn't even on the curriculum at my girls' school, so I really don't know very much about it. Okay, so now the blade is nice and safe. So I have a piece of cardboard here, and hopefully you'll have cardboard from some of the packages delivered during lockdown. And I'm going to build a vise with this to give me a nice sturdy object to lean my handle against while I'm cutting it. And I've got a scrap of wood here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line them up like so. So I've got this kind of L of cardboard under the wood. And that's going to give me an edge to bump my knife handle up to, get it the right way around. So that when I saw it, it's held steady. So I'm just going to attach that to the desk, and I'm using a spring clamp here. These spring clamps are really useful. I use them when I'm drying things flat and I want to put them between boards and clamp everything to allow paper to dry flat, and various other uses in the studio. So, you know, they're a great thing to have around, and they're also handy for this particular job. So that's now all held nice and sturdy and flat, and I can put my tool into place. There's the mark where I'm going to cut it, and I'm actually going to cut it over the cardboard, not over my table, because if I slip then I'd rather cut the cardboard than cut my table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the heel of my hand as a clamp, and that's nice and steady, and it's well out of the way of the blade as well while I'm cutting. So all I'm going to do is just take my hacksaw and cut off the end. And I can tell that Ben is wincing at my saw technique, so yeah, apologies for the jerky sawing. So I'm just going to turn the tool And there we go. So I can't be good at cutting everything, but I have managed to get the end of my hangito off like so. So now it's short and it's actually more or less the right length. So I need to finish off the handle because at the moment it's quite hard and there's sharp edges there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some sandpaper. So I've got myself a sanding block. I have them in the studio anyway because I always key the lino with a very light sanding before I start my printing. This one is actually, it's a bit too rough for keying lino. I bought it by mistake, but it's going to be perfect for this job. So all I'm going to do is to go around the tool and just take off that hard edge where I've sawn it, so that when I hold it in my hand it's comfortable. And of course, because the blade is well wrapped in masking tape, I can do this. Do not do this unless you have wrapped your blade up nice and secure. Otherwise it's going to be a horrible mess. There we go. So now what I've got is my finished tool with a nice soft rounded handle that's going to be fitted comfortably into my hand. So I can show you how you can use this to cut lino. Having cut the handle off the hangito successfully, I want to just show you how it's held and how it's cut if you're not familiar with the tool. I'm not going to use this one because this one needs its blade polishing before I can use it. So I'm going to go back to using one that I've prepared for teaching. And the way to hold it, as I said before, is in your fist, and it's held with the long tip at your knuckle and the short part at the back of your hand here. Now these are very much designed right or left-handed. If you're left-handed and you've bought a box of tools, it will be tricky to use this knife. But I'm right-handed and I'm holding it correctly for the right hand, and it's the tip of the blade that you use to cut with. If you use a scalpel for cutting your lino, I've never done that, but if you use a scalpel for cutting your lino, this kind of will make a bit more sense, I think. So it's the tip of the blade that you're using, and what I do is that I use both hands when I'm using a hangito, and I use my left hand, the forefinger of my left hand, and I just rest it on the back of the blade to stabilise it, and I use my knuckles more or less to hold down the lino when I'm working with it. So I've got this little star here, and I'm just going to use the knife to cut that out. So tip of the knife, and you pull towards you to make the cut. So I'm going to do a cut towards me, and the trick to remember is that the bit of the lino that's going to print needs to be under the hand that's doing the cutting. If you remember that, then the slope of the blade will always be away from the work that's going to print into the space that you are clearing out, and it will make for a much more stable cut, and it means you can avoid accidents. So the bit that's going to print, which is the outside of the lino, is under the hand that's doing the cutting. So my blade is always pointing into the middle of the star because that's the bit that's coming out. Okay. So I'm just taking my time and going round, and here we go, the lino's starting to lift out, you can see. So this is quite a nice tool for getting a precise cut. There we go, and out it starts to come. I've lost track of how many times I've gone around now. I think I've got one final cut to do there, and maybe a final cut to do there. So you can see that knife will give you a really nice precise little cut once you've got the hang of holding it. It's going to feel weird to start with because we don't tend to use tools that cut on the pull that you hold in your fist, but once you get used to it, it's a lovely precise tool to use. So that's a little aside on using that hangito knife. Once you've cut it to fit in your hand, it's a lovely precision tool to use.
So Laura's brought me these two new tools to cut the handles off, and I've just taped the caps on the ends of them so that I don't cut myself while I'm sawing it, and I'm going to saw the ends off using my bandsaw. So Laura, do you want to have a feel to see if it's the right length? So now these square ends really want to be softened off, so I'm going to round them over on my belt sander. And there we have it.
So now that I have shortened the handles on these tools and they fit comfortably into my palm and into my fist for doing the cutting, there's another thing that it's a good idea to do with new tools, and that's to give the blades a polish before you start using them. When I'm talking about the blades, the actual bit that I want to work with is where the blade just tilts at the tip, and with the one here it's the back of the blade, and also with the hangito it's the reverse of the blade where there is a tilt. Now when they come fresh from the shop they'll be lovely and sharp, but hopefully you can see that there is a slight satin finish to those blades. That's because the sharpening has left micro ridges on the blade, and when you start cutting, the first thing that's going to happen is all those little micro ridges are going to be knocked off, and so the blade will go blunt quite quickly. If you polish away those ridges before you start cutting, the blade will stay much sharper for longer. And also this stropping or honing or polishing technique that I'm about to show you is also a great way of maintaining your tools while you're working, keeping them nice and sharp and polishing away any little dings that you might put into them yourself. Now there is a much more detailed video about sharpening. In fact, there are two in the first Lino with Laura series, but I'm going to go through the process now just to remind you. So the next bit of the process is to polish the little beveled end of the blades, and to do that I've got a couple of things to help me. I've got some leather. Now this was the back of an old sofa I think, but any leather will do, so an old belt from a charity shop, or an old handbag, or anything you can chop up to make a piece of leather is absolutely fine. I have stuck this to some MDF to stabilise it, because what you don't want is the leather wrapping round the tool. You want the leather flat on the table. And this is the back of the leather. It's not the shiny side, it's the back of the leather. If you are in lockdown, I would suggest that you use the back of a belt you've got that you don't mind very much getting mucky. So the other thing I've got is this honing or stropping paste. Sometimes it's called honing compound. This one's made by Turmec. But again, if you're in lockdown and you can't get hold of any of this, then you can actually use scouring cream, the sort of thing you'd use to clean the top of a cooker. Sif, I think, is a trade name for that sort of thing. So a slightly gritty cream like that will do the trick. This is the real deal. And a tube like this costs about, I think it's about £8 or £9, and it's going to last you for ages. So all you need to do is to put a little bit of the stropping paste at the top of the leather there. And I've got plenty in the leather actually. I've just put a little bit more on, but you get a build up of it in the leather anyway. And I'm going to take my first tool, and it's this little bevel at the tip of the blade that I'm working with. And I'm going to put it down at the angle of the bevel into the paste, and I'm going to pull it firmly down towards me. Don't rub it up and down because you'll just slice through the leather if you do that. So it's pulling towards you. And I'm just checking it. Yeah, that's coming on nicely. And what will happen if it's a new blade, you'll be able to see your progress because it will go from satin finish into mirror finish. If you are at all worried, get a permanent pen and colour the back of the blade where you want it sharp with the pen, and as you polish, that pen mark will disappear and you know that you're in the right place. But I can see here, because this is new, that actually it's polishing up a treat. So it doesn't take very much. If you are working with blades that you're already using, you won't be able to check that satin into mirror finish. So what I tend to do is to have a little scrap of lino beside me, and as I polish I test until the blade is working nice and sharp. So that's lovely. That's that one done. And this one, the Hangito knife that I showed you earlier, the one that's held in the fist, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt the leather slightly to make it easier for me, because what I want is to come at the angle of that slanting bevel at the tip of the blade. And again, I'm just going to come straight down and polish off. Now, this is something that doesn't get talked about much. You kind of assume that when you get a new blade, a new tool from the shop, that it's just good to go. But if you take the trouble to do this extra step, it does mean that you'll keep that sharpness for a lot longer. So it is good practice if you can get into the habit of doing it. I have to sort of consciously make the effort because my temptation is to rip the cover off the new blade and get cutting straight away. So I've kind of learned to take my time over this. Okay. So again, that's perfect. That's gone from satin to mirror. So here we are. The tools are now properly honed and polished. So the blades are mirror finish, no ridges to be knocked off, and they'll stay nice and sharp. And the handles are the right length and smoothed over. So finally, absolutely ready for me to dash off and cut some more lino. I hope you found that useful and that you'll join me again.